Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me at this conference. Before we start, I would like to say a few things, because from my perspective, it's a huge honor to be here for two reasons, at least for two reasons. One, I'm not the Ruby guy. Sorry for that. I'm usually writing a PHP code, so I expect some boo right now. Okay, I can handle it. And the second reason is that this Institute of Computer Science is my alma mater. I graduated here many years ago. I had an opportunity to teach some students here how to use those techniques to model the software. So big honor for me. So this talk will be about the good and the bad and the remote part of the collaborative domain modeling with EventStorming. Yes, in the title of this talk, there is an EventStorming, but this talk is not about the EventStorming itself. There's a bunch of presentations describing what the EventStorming is, how you can use it, how you can combine it with different approaches like domain-driven design, just to create a software that matters, the software which is easy to evolve and handle and maintain in the long term. But I would like to focus about the surrounding. And of course, if you don't know what the EventStorming is, we'll create a small definition. My name is Mariusz, as I was introduced by Andrzej, Mariusz Gil. I'm a software architect for, I don't know, 22, 23 years, something like that. Ex-CTO, trainer, consultant. Last couple of years, I'm usually using those techniques like domain-driven design, EventStorming, to refactor old legacy. Because there is business reasons to evolve the software, so I'm using those techniques on my daily basis. I'm also hosting a podcast which is called A Better Software Design, and I'm very curious, who is familiar with this podcast? Oh, thank you very much. Rest of you has a homework. Because this podcast is about software architecture. Unfortunately, it's in Polish, but there are a few episodes in English. So if you would like to, go up. So, the good part and the spoiler. There are some ways how we can work and how we can use those techniques like EventStorming, which was designed to run offsite in the digital world. I would like to talk a little bit about the bad side. And unfortunately, there is still some problems. There are still some problems in this digital world. And then finally, the remote part, which is the spoiler. It's a good and the bad side for the same time. So, the EventStorming, the technique which was mentioned in the talk title. The EventStorming, the short introduction I can provide you is the way how we can discuss the software, the problem, by analyzing the events which happen inside this problem. So instead of creating at the beginning use cases how you would like to use the system, creating maybe database at the beginning of the project, instead of that, you can start to talk about something which happened inside this problem. You can start to identify some business domain events, for example, describing very important changes in your domain. You can organize them one by one over the time, and then you can start to have a meaningful conversations around those events. Because this event in the EventStorming technique is just the beginning. Because if you can identify in your problem, in your application, in your business scenario, something interesting which happened. For example, the order was created. Maybe the customer canceled the payment or things like that. There is a bunch of options you can explore. For example, you can ask yourself, your colleagues, your domain expert, the person with the knowledge, why I've got this event in my system. What was the trigger? You can name it. You can point it. You can point your finger over the timeline and say, here, there was an action which triggered this event. So if you've got an event, you can ask, now, what is the trigger? If you've got a trigger, you can ask yourself, your colleagues, one more time, your domain experts, that maybe we can see some other consequences, some other events. And starting from the single orange sticky note, you can explore the whole scenario. And after all, you see all the actions, all the changes, all the processes which are existing in your software, in your problem space. So when you see it, from the developer point of view, you may extract some very important things we need to implement. For example, if you will be able to notice that some parts of your events, which are the consequence of this particular action we are talking about, should happen in the scenario, in the pattern, all or nothing. So there is no way that you can postpone one of them. For example, you see 3 events and you cannot postpone any of them, because if you postpone it in the software, you put it on the queue, you perform some asynchronic operations, and this event will be handled, let's say, 5 seconds later, there is a bunch of business problems and you cannot do that. If you see that this and this and this event should happen under this and this and this condition, and these conditions are related to the trigger you already pointed, you may start to think that maybe in my software it should happen inside, for example, a single object. And then combining this event storming approach with other techniques like domain-driven design, things like that, may lead you to the conclusions that in my software there are some places where I should care, for example, for data consistency, data integrity, and then maybe you will be able to see some aggregates. And maybe your domain expert may say something like that this event, this event, this event, when those events happen and you perform this particular action, I expect this and this and this. And the domain expert may point some other events from the workshop, and then you can extract an acceptance criteria. You can use it, for example, given when then approach, and then you can automate it as a test. So as you see, starting from very, very single important change in your domain may lead you to very interesting conclusion from the developer point of view. Because starting from this, you can even design the whole system. So this is why I care about the event storming so much. Because for many other techniques I tested in last years, many years, this is a best approach which allows me to achieve probably the best result in the shortest amount of the time. Of course, not the event storming itself, but event storming combined with other approaches like mentioned already, domain-driven design. So before 2020, the typical event storming session looked like that. This is a session, the production photo, the photo from the production session taken probably at Warsaw in Poland. So the whole room, large, a lot of participants, a lot of space, a lot of materials, a lot of domain experts, a lot of people who would like to gather this knowledge because we need to deliver a software, right? And then we have conversations. And sometimes you see that in the room there are 30 people, sometimes 2. This is also production photo from production session. Or sometimes you can see even the Andrzej on the session in the investment. It was, I think, in Wrocław, right? A couple years ago. The main reason why I would like to have domain experts, developers, everyone involved in the project in the same room, because of this moment. Because sometimes the domain expert or the developer may say, looking on the same event, that it's not exactly that. It shouldn't be this way. It should be done this way and this way and this way. I don't agree with you. So using this very, very easy approach and not so complicated technique, we can speed up a lot of development before even a single line of code will be written. So for example, if Andrzej talked about the domains, the event storming combined with the strategic domain-driven design is one of the way how you can create boundaries in your software, for example, for different applications, for different modules, for different microservices, and those boundaries will allow you to evolve the software in the long term. But in 2020, another domain event happened. So something important happened, and one event crossed the boundary and the whole world exploded. So I don't know what is your experience, but I had the opportunity to work with different teams, and in almost every single team, where before, on every single meeting, you saw smiling faces, after the March 2020, all you saw on the meetings was like that. Looks familiar? Yeah. Moreover, I used to rely on communication skills during this kind of workshop, because the best way how we can communicate is just have a conversation, but every single conversation, every single meeting, even today, starts from this weird question. Do you hear me? And in this environment, under these circumstances, I decided to run, probably in, I don't know, May 2020, a workshop, because in March, when in Poland, the first lockdown was introduced, I stopped working with this approach because I had no possibility to work with team face-to-face. Because every single workshop before the pandemic was in offline. So I started, I ran the workshop, and I was surprised because it was very, very efficient. Everyone was involved. And of course, I'm joking, because the first meeting was a completely disaster. Everyone was on mute. No one would like to participate in the workshop. The goal for this workshop wasn't achieved. And of course, there was a problem with the financing, so the big fuck up. So I realized that in one moment, when this lockdown was introduced, I lost my very, very important tool in my software architect toolbox, which is unlimited, unbounded, and unrestricted communications. So during this workshop, I realized that interactions, the possibility to chat with the domain expert, to learn about the events, to share my thinking about those events, is completely gone. I have no possibility to interact. The body language, another tool I heavily rely on, because sometimes during the workshop, imagine that you've got a situation that there is a development team, the management team, the CEO of the company. There are multiple scenarios as a facilitator you should take care of. For example, maybe you would like to note about the problems because the CEO of the company is in the room. So you don't speak, but your body will speak for you. So as a facilitator, I was looking for the body language. But when it comes to, Zoom meetings and Google Hangouts or any other tools, there is no body language. What I see is blurry face, even if you turn on your camera. So body language, gone. The group switching. During the offline event storming, when you've got, for example, 10 meters of modeling space, you've got 3, 4, 5 domain experts, you can vote by your legs. Do you agree with them? Are you interested in? If not, you can switch the group. Everything is smooth. No one even noticed that you modified your group and you would like to participate in different approach. When it comes to online meetings, you probably were assigned to a particular group and you cannot modify it. So group switching, gone. And after all the engagement, which also I heavily rely on, completely gone. So this is why it was disaster. So Alberto Bandolini, the inventor of the event storming, a few years ago wrote this book, Introduction to the Event Storming. And after this workshop, one thing hit me for the second time very, very strongly. Because in this book, there is a dedicated chapter about the remote event storming, how to perform this in digital world. The problem is that this chapter is intentionally left blank. I am not surprised. Unfortunately, all my experience as a developer, as an architect, as a person who used this approach to design a software, immediately gone. But, as Anjan said, we started to work in some groups just to learn how we can use this technique again under the current situation, because it seems that the pandemic, the remote world will be with us for a little bit longer than expected. So I started to think how I can use this situation for me. I don't know if you are familiar with Henry Kaiser. He said many interesting things, but one is that the problems for you should be just opportunities to work close. But what does it even mean? So from the perspective of the development, we can create some problems just to learn something. So let me introduce, for example, this. If you are, for example, a user of object relational mapper, and your whole software rely on it, forget about ORM. Start to use event sourcing. Not in the production, in your, for example, pet project, for one day. Don't use ORM. If you are using object-oriented design and you are heavily rely on the state, go functional. Forget about the state. If you are using the if statement in the code, try to use something different and try to avoid using this particular statement for a moment. And you will probably learn a lot, because you will see that creation limitation allows you to see a completely different solutions, maybe even which are invisible before. So no pain, no gain. So you can start learning this way. And during the March 2020, everyone in the internet probably start to learn. This particular chart is chart representing the trend for the phrase online whiteboard. So probably you know exactly what is the date before. This particular chart represents a term, mirror whiteboard. So I started to use those applications on the production, and I realized that one more time I lost another my important tool, which is unlimited expression. Because if you are running a workshop in the world, you've got some Sharpies, you've got some papers, you've got some stickies, that's it. This is all you need to create a model of your software, believe or not. On the sticky, you can create the model how you would like to have the software later in the implementation phase. If the model is not working, the code will not work as well. If the code is working, if the project is working on the stickies, there is a chance that you can create an implementation for those. And every single sticky from this, for example, EventStorming workshop can be translated for something which can be implemented. For example, the event. The event represents an important change, so you can emit the event in your application. But still, the event represents important change. My object was changed. I changed a property. So I see in the model the event, but the implementation, I see a line which changed this particular object. The comment is trigger for a change. Yeah, it can be a comment and command handler pattern. Why not? But why not to think about the comment like a method invocation? So if you will be able, after this workshop, establish a connection between the model and your programming style, this is just a visual representation of your code. And of course, it's not the main goal of the EventStorming, because the main goal is to understand the problem, but yeah, you've got multiple options. So this is why I believe this technique is worth to explore. So usually on this kind of workshop, I create a lot of, for example, visualizations, because as Eric Evans said, sometimes all you need to do is create a metaphor of your system. So one of the large-scale structure described in the famous DDD book is about the metaphors. Sometimes all you need to do is visualize things. But if you're using a tool like Miro, like Mural, like ClickUp, maybe you have some limitations, so your creativity, your expression is completely limited, and you cannot achieve your goals for this particular session. Fortunately, all those tools started to learn, as people said. So almost every single session in the pandemic, when we started they running with the Miro or any other tool, there was a message, okay, so we've got a new feature, this one, this one, this one. And suddenly, those tools, which were, I believe, completely unusable before the pandemic, started to be a game changer for this kind of workshops. So the first advice from this talk I would like to share you is know your tools. And I can bet with every single one of you that even if you are talking about your programming editor, you are not using, I don't know, 30% of features this tool you allow to perform. So maybe even I should correct myself, because we shouldn't know our tools. We should master the tool, maybe the tools. So the question is why? Because your tool set of your tool you are using should be the size of your microservice you may implement in your system. The question is why? The answer is because it should be as small as possible, but not smaller. And the question is why? And the answer is because during this kind of workshop, when you have a contact, you have opportunity to work with maybe non-very technical people, you should, for any cost, avoid overwhelming them. So if you introduce a bunch of different tools solving dedicated problems, but there are many of them, it will be very, very hard to achieve the goal for this particular modeling session. So my go-to set of the tools currently is the Miro plus XAM. If you can eliminate one of them, but still you can have a possibility to work, it's even better. So the Miro allows me to express everything, because this tool is not putting any limitations what you can design, but many other tools which are dedicated to EventStorming modeling, trying to put some conventions, and they are trying to limit you. If you would like to, for example, visualize something, like relationships, like maybe some other pictures that should help participants to understand what's going on, because sometimes the one single picture can deliver more insights than any other, description or event, it will be broken. So if you are master your tool, if you've got this, in your fingertips, all the shortcuts and things like that, you can be very, very efficient. And the best, you probably don't want to put yourself in the situation when you are trying, during this kind of workshop, express the problem, visualize the things you are talking about, spending 10 minutes when everyone in the room, for example, 25 persons, are waiting for you, because this is the weight of the time. And of course, this kind of tools, if we can move the modeling to the online world against to the offline situation, allow us to speed up to see different possibilities. Sometimes all you need to do during this kind of workshop is to split the modeling group to see that the same thing can be treated and implemented and modeled completely differently. If you've got only one idea how to implement something, you shouldn't implement it. Always it's worth to see another approach, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three, and then you've got an option. And imagine that setuping scenarios, setuping the stage, the place when different groups can model the same thing, it usually takes at least 10 minutes. And then you've got a gain. So, and of course, one thing which is extremely important, and you can get some benefits from that, is that you are no longer limited to the persons in the particular situation in the room. I mean, digital event storming allows you to invite any persons you would like to have from the world. Of course, there is a problem with the time zones and things like that, but it's way better to have someone in the room on the call than having a flight to different country, which is a cost, inefficient, and stuff like that. So having different perspectives, which weren't in the room before, is something which will be very, very difficult to drop in the future when we decide to go from online to offline. So, but even if you are able to master the tool, even if you are able to invite the people from the different countries, and you know how exactly to perform this particular session, a different scenario may happen. For example, imagine that you've got 25 different persons from different organizations on the call, and suddenly your network is going to stop to work, or your audio is going to stop to work. By the way, this example is taken from my experience from this week. I was talking to the team on the call. I was pretty sure that everyone in the room muted the microphone because there was some noisy background. After a few minutes, I realized that there was a problem with my computer because I don't hear them. Under the hood, my computer ran some updates, which completely ruined my permissions on the laptop, and I need to restart everything. So imagine how difficult it was when you've got, for example, in the room, the CEO of the company, and you cannot handle this kind of situation. And finally, the power supply will be cut off. So all the scenarios are taken from my personal experience. Unfortunately, from this month. So everything will fail, so be prepared. This is why current scenario for this kind of workshop. Even if you are prepared, so always have a backup plan for the internet connection, backup plan for the microphone, backup plan for everything, because like in reward, everything may fail. So sometimes you can make even this kind of scenario that one day before the workshop, you will get a question from the attendees that, or the statement that we cannot store the data outside UA. And if you rely heavily on a single tool, like a mirror, it may be very, very problematic because suddenly the cloud seems to be a problem because of the data location. So if you face this kind of situation, probably your experience or your existing experience with this tool, your confidence gone one more time. So if you would like to run this workshop or any other workshop in a little bit larger scale, so please be prepared for everything, so expect unexpected, is the very, very interesting option. So, but digital world allows us to perform one thing, I believe, way better than before. Because usually, when it comes to the session organization, there is a lot of problems, a lot of hotel booking, a lot of traveling, things like that, organizations, to allow few people be in the same room, in particular, for example, place. And then you've got 1, 2, 3 days to solve the problem because you've gotten access to domain expert, to people with knowledge, for a very, very limited amount of the time. So it can be very, very exhausted. So instead of that, if you've got an access to the person, even outside the globe, so way better option will be to work with the cycles. So every single cycle can be splitted into the plan, into the work, rethink, and iterate phase. Because, for example, if you would like to achieve something, every single session, every single workshop should be very, very well prepared. So the goal, the outcome should be visible for you as a facilitator, because then you know what kind of actions, what kind of explorations you would like to perform. So the work, the plan, the work, the rethink, and the iterate. And where is the better approach? So in the real world, when you've got then access to the domain experts, for example, for 2-3 days, you've got only 1 or 2 points, moment in the time, when you can correct your workshop, usually after a day. After the day, you can think what's happened. If you are on course, maybe yes, maybe no, and you can adjust your direction. If you can expand this workshop for a little bit longer, maybe you can put some extra days between the sessions. Maybe you can reduce number of hours you are on call. For example, instead of 8 hours, you can work 4 hours. There is a way better chance to adjust the course, because after every single iteration, you've got the point when you can decide, is it okay for us or not, or what we would like to change. So, but the structure of the session in remote will be a little bit different, because usually when it comes to the offline event storming, you've got everyone in the room, so there is a lot of communication, everyone is talking with everyone. But in remote, when you are using, for example, Zoom or any other software, and you are using subgroups, you broke a lot of communication channels. So every single split, when you're splitting the attendees, you're splitting the knowledge. So every single split should become the merge after all, because maybe one group realized there is an issue with the software, and then we need to talk about. So you are working usually with the structure, the split, the merge, the split, the merge, sometimes even with the bigger number of the groups. So what does that mean for you as a person who lead this workshop? Because every single time you need to be fully focused on expectations for every single group. Even if you are talking with single group, you should be ready to react what happened in other groups. If you see before the workshop that number of the groups you are trying to engage to extract this domain knowledge is higher, maybe your plan should be adjusted. So reacting on the workshop is probably the worst thing you can do, react before the workshop. So plan and plan and plan. So establishing the channels, establishing the spaces for every single group to work together, for example, on the mirror and other tools, is crucial. But, however, even if you are talking, so with this high-level perspective, how this workshop can be performed, there is still a space for one thing, for creativity. So this picture was taken on the production workshop. This picture was taken on the online workshop, also production. And it makes, maybe it looks very, very silly, like some icons, some smiles and things like that. But when it comes to discussion about a very, very complicated problems, and there are some, problems in the communication, adding some fun is a secret sauce which makes a conversation a little bit easier, because suddenly it's way easier to conversate even with the CEO of the company. So as you see, the good part is that, yeah, there are some ways how we can work in this current situation, and unfortunately there are some opportunities we can use. For example, we've got some access to the people which are completely inaccessible for us before. The bad part is, yes, we need to still work mostly remotely. For many persons, yes, this is a problem. But the bad other side is that some parts of this workshop, especially when it comes to the large-scale workshop, when you've got, let's say, 30 persons in the room, probably at the beginning will still don't work because of communications channels. So the remote, from my perspective, it's still the good and the bad. I can extract some good part for me. So, from my perspective, can online replace the offline? In some scenarios, yes. In some scenarios, when it comes to the, for example, a very, very detailed modeling sessions, when you are talking about a concrete solution, you are not exploring, the online even can beat the offline. And I would like prefer the online workshop instead of offline. So for you, I don't know, everyone have probably a unique perspective. So thank you very much, and happy remote sessions.
Did you experiment with such sessions which are, because of the time zone issues or because they were so complicated that they were kind of asynchronous, that some people didn't overlap with each other?
The question was motivated, probably. No, I have no experience with the asynchronic event storming, because from my perspective, adding a single event to the board usually can introduce another questions, another opinions. So at least from my perspective, it will extend the term, the period for the whole event very, very, and it's probably not good for my part.
So usually developers want to write code and they don't really need like planning, participating in sessions, workshops, stuff like that. So how do you convince your teammates to participate and be vocal and proactive?
A good question. From my point of view, if you will be able to see that the model of the discussion, I mean the notes, the stickies which were created and discussed, can be converted into the software, it's a game changer. But it's very, very hard to see at the beginning. So, for example, the case from this week, we started to analyze one scenario from the application into the client world. So we started from the events. We started to ask the domain experts about the triggers. So we've got some events, we've got some comments. And then we started to explore the conditions, why those triggers, why those comments cannot be executed. So we discovered, I'm trying to avoid a term rule because right now it's very, very interesting topic on the Twitter about this naming in the event storming. So let's call it conditions. And then we are able to combine them together. I mean, I see the whole process. I see the whole rules. I see all the consequences we need to handle in the application. By the consequences, I mean saves into the database. Because this is a meaningful change for me as a developer. It's so important, I need to store it. So we started to explore by discussion with domain experts, under some conditions, can we or we can't postpone some events. So we discover some islands of the events which should happen together. Because if you postpone it, if you split them, there are some issues very, very painful for the business. So we started to think, okay, so if this is a process and we see exactly how the process looks like, so how we can translate into the code? So we started to extract some informations, some nouns which are visible in this process. So we started to see that we are touching some data. We see the rules, how we are touching those data. And finally, we are able to model an object which contains those data, which emit those events, and which is able to handle those commands we are seeing in the model. And the last part was the naming. We see something, how it looks like, how it behaves. So, okay, let's make another step. Let's name it. And what is really, really interesting, that the last step was, if we add a keyword, class, or private, or public, we've got a model of the software. We've got the object. So if you see, or if you can see that you can extract your design. For example, I expressed an object scenario, but you can express an API or boundaries of your bounded context, and you can translate the outcomes of this discussion into the software. Yeah, you don't need to convince them. Especially if a little bit earlier, you may extract some acceptance criteria with this given when then approach, for example. And from the technical point of view, now you see, okay, I've got a test to the extracted object. So you can convert it, you can merge it, and after all, it's very, very hard to question this model. I mean that, after all you need to do is to, convert those stickies into the code. And I know that maybe it sounds very, very weird what I'm talking about, but there are some presentations on the YouTube, maybe they are linked on the Twitter, that you can see the whole process. If you see the one passage over this process from idea to the code, yeah, as I mentioned, you don't need to convince anybody.
Thank you very much for your presentation, for sharing your experience and perspective. I really feel inspired. And I have two questions. First, about this merge. Maybe I need to move a bit. About this merge phase you mentioned. From my experience from remote, I frequently feel that when people meet together, they kind of in totally different worlds, and it's hard to find where do they actually should start to find what is common, what is different, and I wonder how do you moderate it to really achieve this merge?
Usually the merge, I mean, before the merge there was a subgroup discussions. Every single group was using a very, very strict terminology as a baseline. Maybe it was extended because why not, if it's help to express the discussion term. On the merge, I usually perform that I'm trying to interpret the result of the group work. So if I don't interpret correctly, okay, so there is a chance that I can be corrected and everyone in the room can be connected and corrected as well. So this is my approach. Maybe sometimes I would like to ask some, detailed questions just to precise things, but I would like to also avoid the situation that this merge scenario will take, for example, 1 hour. Because, we've got some limited time, usually a few hours per day. So the split the work, usually I'm using some time boxes just to have, everything on track. And of course, I don't know how many iterations will be needed to achieve the goal, but maybe we can do it a little bit earlier. Maybe we need some extra iterations, but this works for me.
Thanks. And if I may, I have
sure.
one more question. EventStorming is awesome when you actually can gather people who are needed there. But as you mentioned, sometimes there are issues with time zones. That's one reason. But you also have people who are so busy that you cannot really get them on the calendar with the rest of the group. And I wonder, how do you approach them? Do you have some tested approach that works for you?
Usually I've got two approaches for persons who cannot participate for the whole time. One is that using this discussion about the events, sometimes there are some questions which are very, very hard to answer because the knowledge is missing. This particular person you're talking about is outside the room. So, but we can annotate this problem, and after the session, but before the next iteration, we can gather the answer. So this is my first approach. Notate the questions, gather the knowledge between the session, and present the result at the beginning of the next session. And the second approach is way simpler. When we plan the workshop, and we know who should be in the room, why, and things like that, sometimes there is a set of the people which are on call. Just like that. And then this kind of person probably will be on call, and then if we've got a problem, okay, this person can join us, for example, for a few minutes, answer the particular question, and leave the room because it's very, very busy. So those solutions work for me very, very well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hello, Mariusz.
Hello.
Really nice presentation, but I have a question to you regarding not maybe even storming, but in general workshop. In a problem in a positive scenario. For example, you have a whole team, all of the people that is needed to do workshops, full engagement, full faith in success. It doesn't matter, it's, I don't know, 4 hours online or 3 days offline. From my experience, I see a lot of situations when that whole team was, wow, we will do it, we will change it. Yeah, if it will change, if we are able to change it, everything will be solved. It's great, but the workshops ended.
And nothing's happened.
And nothing's happened, but not right, really nothing's happened, but people like changing the mode from the workshops, like a holiday, like we have a faith in success, to it will take a year. No, I don't want to touch this part of this shit. And do you have any advice to not like be an attendant or prepare workshops or wherever in organization structure, but to keep a faith in sort of success, to make from the theoretical discussion, like the sticky notes, into a real goals, real results?
I can provide you an example from Wednesday this week. Because
Okay.
exactly this problem was mentioned after the workshop. What is the next step? And the voice in the room was, because we have a roadmap, we've got some tickets to do, and then maybe we'll be able to perform something, for example, next year. I believe there are, to answer at least one, the question is why even we organize this workshop. Maybe it wasn't the best idea, because right now the mood and the things you mentioned. But the second approach will be, if the workshop, on the workshop, we created some outcomes. We've got some idea what can be done in this project. Usually, which was the best, is to create a person of the plan and assign to the plan to the person that, okay, I need you as a change agent change, sorry for that, and now it's your responsibility to push it. So if the responsibility will be on the group, nothing will happen, usually. If the responsibility is on the person, a single person, and this person has a privilege in the organization to push, yeah, the outcome will be introduced to the software. However, of course, there are scenarios that you need some budget for that, you need some, time for development, and so on and so on. So you need to speak to the person which is responsible in the organization for granting the permission to do that in terms which are really easy to understand in this person. For example, if you would like to introduce the outcome and the benefits for the organizations to the non-technical person using the terminology that if we do this and this and this, the quality metric, the outcome metric will be so good, nothing will happen. Now, you should identify the reason or the business reason or the business argument which will be easy to understand for the second party. Like, for example, if we do this outcome from this workshop, if we will implement it, for example, we will speed up development, or we'll be able to deliver missing features, for example, in this period of the time. So the person who will be, interested in pushing in and marketing in the organization. Okay. But the question is, the first question should be in the air, why we even organize this session? Yeah? Because if there was, for example, internal session from the development team, how we can improve the world, and there is no budget for improving the world, nothing happened. Something should be done before this workshop, as I mentioned, in terms of the plan. But we can discuss it. The problem is very, very large and complex, so we can discuss it during the break if you would like to.
Okay.
So thank you very much one more time. Have a nice conference.